Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all of our local and international national guests. My name is Tanzila Hussain, Research Assistant, Center for Government Studies. Our next session will focus on the topic, the human century, building a moral economy for a planet in peril. This important discussion will explore how our values, choices, and responsibilities can shape our more sustainable future. To guide us through this meaningful topic, we are honored to have our distinguished speakers. We have Mr. Kallol Bhattacherjee, Senior Assistant Editor, The Hindu, India. And we also have Constantino Xavier, Senior Fellow, Center for Social and Economic Progress, India. Then we have Jain Khan, Editor, Diplomatic Affairs, Minute Mirror newspaper, Pakistan. And we also have Abdullah Rasheed, former Minister of State for Education, Maldives. And last, not the least, Nishan, Executive Director, Verité Research, Sri Lanka. And we also have our moderator, Bhattacherjee, Senior Researcher, Center for Government Studies. All of our speakers shared their insights on moral economy and human responsibility. The session will continue under the guidance of our moderator, Bhattacherjee. Thank you all for joining us. Now I would like to hand over the session to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone to the final plenary session of the Bay of Bengal Conversation 2025. Thank you all so much for spending 3 days with us, having so many different conversations on so many different topics, all of which are vital for shaping our collective future. The topic we have chosen as the last, the topic for the last plenary session we have with us is the human century, building a moral economy for a planet in peril. I received, perks of being an organizer, I suppose, is that you receive a lot of feedback from the speakers. And I'm very pleased that our titling this year and also our blurbs have resonated with so many people, and I have received a lot of positive feedback. So I would like to just read this blurb out, because I think it's very interesting. This century will test not just our intelligence, but our conscience. Progress has come at a cost we can no longer ignore. Rising seas, burning forests, broken economies, and the quiet erosion of empathy. Growth without responsibility has left the planet weary and people divided. Yet, crisis also brings a rare opportunity to begin again, to build an economy that values care as much as competition and dignity as much as data. The question is simple but urgent. Can we build a future that serves humanity, not just markets? The answer will define whether the next 100 years belong to humans or just to history. So I have with us a very distinguished panel, but it is unfortunately a panel. We tried our best, but we had a lot of issues with dropouts at the last moment. But I hope you will tolerate us for just a little bit. I would like to begin by asking the former minister this fundamental question, I believe the main question of the plenary. What is a moral economy? And perhaps the minister can take to the podium and give his answer.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. My fellow panelists and other distinguished guests and participants, Assalamu alaikum and very good evening. I can say we have a very important topic. I'm sure all the topics are important, and the topic we are going to discuss is definitely important. The moral economy. Now the question is, our economy in the world, is it moral? If an economy is moral, how do we know that that's a moral economy or not? There are certain indicators to see whether the economy is moral or not. One of the fundamental indicators is the equal distribution of wealth in the world. If we take example from a country, in the people in the country, I can say our world economy is not really a moral economy. You may wonder why I said this. There are reasons. The wealthiest 1% of the world's population holds about 46% of global total wealth. Since this is a fact, can we say that we have a moral economy? Definitely no, we can't say that. Similarly, the top 10% of adults hold roughly 76% of the total global wealth. And another surprising evidence is that the bottom 50% of the world population owns barely just 1% of the world's wealth. We are talking about 4.1 billion people owns only 1% of the world's wealth. That is why we cannot say our current economy is a moral economy. And then, since we are in Bangladesh, I think we have to look at how the economic system in the Bangladesh as well. When I checked it, I found that the top 10% of the population in Bangladesh controls 58.5% of the nation's wealth. Therefore, in Bangladesh also, it's not a really a moral economy. Now the question is, how can we build a moral economy? In order to build a moral economy, what we need to do is there should be equal distribution of wealth in the country. In every country, we have vulnerable group. They are always depending on others. Some countries are depending on donor countries. Within the country, vulnerable peoples are depending on the government, or they are depending on donors. If this dependency is there, always this inequality will remain. Therefore, in order to break this down, what we need to do is we have to promote human capital within the country, providing education and training, make these vulnerable people employable. Then they will have an opportunity to work and to earn and to contribute to the country's economy. Anyone who is not contributing country's economy will be a liability to the economy. Therefore, in order to make them independent, what we need to do is, especially the vulnerable people, should get the education, should get the skills, and they should be ready to contribute to the economy. Then the distribution of nation's wealth will become to an equal and fair manner. With this, I conclude my part here. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was beautiful. So the question of how to build a moral economy, we heard from a former statesman. So I would like now to ask basically the same question to our distinguished panelist, Mr. Kallol. How do we build a moral economy?
Am I audible? Okay, good. Well, I think for me as a journalist and a writer who writes on public policies and foreign affairs, what I feel is that not just economic policies or even foreign policies, all public policies must take the last man or the last person or the last woman standing. I think that's really the test of public policy. Because if the public policies are not really relevant to the last person in the queue, then I'm not sure if public policies would really pass the test of legitimacy. And I think here I'm just making up a point of principle, because if we really have to make public policies and come to the issue of, as you are raising, moral economy, in this age of algorithm-driven public sentiments and algorithm-driven public debates, I think very often what's lost is the fact that we have to remember the weakest person in the human society that we inhabit. Our societies have marginalized communities, women, people from the minority communities, people who don't have the ready access to I would say, the top of the pyramid kind of resources, who often have access to the leftover items in the social or the government distribution network. So I think it's essential to remember that any public policy that we make, say, for example, if I have to go to war tomorrow, or if I have to launch an economic policy tomorrow, I have to remember that this particular policy must remember that the last person standing in my society is going to be impacted by it. I'm always reminded of this interaction that the late Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had reportedly with the editors of Financial Times in London when he was the finance minister of India in the 1990s. Reportedly, Dr. Singh went to the Financial Times office and he met the editors of Financial Times. And as usual, editors of FT had wonderful ideas about what should be done to the Indian economy. And Dr. Singh said smilingly that, yes, I can do everything that you want me to do, but the problem is tomorrow 1 million people are going to die. So I have to remember that that particular touchstone of public policy that, very often the last person in the society, the weak, the disenfranchised, or the people who are likely to be disenfranchised in an authoritarian society, these are the people who are going to be most affected by public policy, or if there is not a moral economy. I would say that that's really the test. And of course, I'm borrowing very, very generously from the Rawlsian position, because I think I'm not making a grand demand from moral economy or public policy makers. I'm not asking them to be equality oriented. I don't want them to be equity oriented. I'm just saying be fair. Just remember to be fair. Just remember whatever you do is going to affect the weakest person in the society. And if you remember that, then you would be restrained in your policies in some ways. So I think moral economy to me is that economy where the last man or the last woman or the last person standing in the teller counter would get that chance before the teller counter closes, and he or she would be entertained. That's it.
Yes, I do understand that is the Rawlsian take on economic advancement. But I would like to then come to Dr. Nishan and pose a follow-up question to that. The question about economic investment as currently understood and the ends that we are measuring and pursuing, could it be collectively misdirecting us about human ends? What kind of rethinking is needed? How shall we step in the direction of agreeing on a modified set of human priorities and pursuits for our world And is this already happening?
Thank you, Apan. I think I feel guilty in a way, or must confess that my profession, economics and economists, are greatly responsible for the kind of erosion of moral concerns and value concerns in the world. And it arises mainly from perhaps an overly misrepresented view of what Adam Smith said when discussing self-interest, that somehow that magically by some invisible hand, people acting in their self-interest leads us to a world in which the common interest or the mutual social interest is taken forward. I want to say that the actual way, the way in which economists look at self-interest is different. They look at it the same way that aeronautical engineers think about gravity. It is the main reason why you can't fly, and self-interest is the main reason why you can't advance the social interest. But aeronautical engineers then look for clever ways to harness gravity, the precise thing that's a problem, for the solution. And that's how the wing of a plane is shaped in a way that when you go fast enough, gravity, which results in lower pressure on top of the wing rather than at the bottom of the wing, allows the plane to pick up. So it's about creating devices to use the very thing that's a problem towards becoming a solution, not to celebrate gravity as the solution to flying, and I think we've got that wrong. Now, the second aspect of that problem is, I think, that economists have concentrated on measuring things and focusing all our attention to advancing the things that we can measure. And of course, GDP has become this thing. Now, but in reality, if you're an economist, you don't talk about GDP, you talk about utility. You mean some measure of human well-being, but because you don't know how to measure that, you end up measuring GDP. And this is a means of getting to better well-being, but the means can become the end. And ultimately, if we focus on increasing GDP and lose the connection between GDP and human well-being, which is the focus of today. Now, somewhere in the 90s, Mahbub ul Haq, the Pakistani economist, and the Indian economist Amartya Sen came up with what's called the Human Development Index, in which they said, look, let's get past GDP and let's also measure some literacy or educational attainment. Now we use years of schooling. And let's measure life expectancy, recognizing that health and education were integral parts of human well-being. Now, my quick proposal today is that we need to look at ways of actually advancing or filling out that HDI, which hasn't got enough traction. And we need to bring in, instead of just years of schooling attainment, for instance, the PISA test. Right, the Program on International Student Attainment, which is a globally doable test, which is showing much better than any other test in the world, the actual ability or capability that is achieved through schooling. We need to put in place, perhaps, like Kallol said, one of the Rawlsian ideas is that everybody has a basic minimum, and that's why we need to perhaps incorporate a measure of poverty in the Human Development Index. But most importantly, what we may have missed and failed to understand is the importance of reducing inequality. Now, Joe Stiglitz, with 6 economists, brought a report to the G20 recently and said inequality must be treated like climate change as a global emergency. Now, there's an open letter signed by over 600 economists in over 70 countries in the world supporting that view, that we must bring inequality back into the center of measuring human well-being and flourishing. So I think it is clear that economists have failed in a way by prioritizing self-interest too much and focusing too much on GDP. And we need to start shifting into thinking about human well-being afresh and start by changing what we measure. In getting there, we have two problems just before we finish. The first problem is what I call the prisoner's dilemma problem, if you all want to look that up. It's actually an economic theory that shows that people acting in their self-interest don't advance mutual interest, but undermine mutual interest because they lack the capacity to coordinate and trust each other. So solving the prisoner's dilemma dynamic for the world, for things like climate change or any kind of public good, even inequality, requires a coordinated approach, without which we will fail to solve these problems only as individuals or as nations. And secondly, the importance of rethinking where we have come to in our understanding of how to do economics. Now, Fukuyama famously published a book called The End of History, imagining that we had come to the end of our understanding of how to govern the world and economics. I think we need to question that thesis and put effort into thinking that where we have arrived in our technocratic abilities or thinking or methodological approach to economics is not the end of history. It is time to think again, and global collaboration to do that is extremely important. Let me stop here to come back later. Yeah.
Thank you, Nishan. So it's very interesting that you mentioned Fukuyama's End of History. I know that our panelist, Constantino, is a disciple of Fukuyama. and perhaps when we are talking about a moral economy, we also need to find practical ways to implement such an economy. So I would ask Constantino to build up on what Nishan was talking about.
Thank you. Not really a disciple at all. In fact, the opposite. He taught me 20 years ago when we were all, I think, reading his book on the end of history and the last man standing, talking Kallol to last man and last women standing in queues. And I remember being in those seminar rooms with Francis Fukuyama, and it didn't sound right to me. You know, you're young, you're meeting a big professor, star at that point in the US, but I was a bit uncomfortable with this idea that there would be a natural lineage of political and economic progression, of universalization of democracy. Everyone would be middle class, everyone would be living in democracies around the world, and therefore the end of history, right? That was the big thesis. But, I mean, let me therefore start with a sort of confession, is I'm very uncomfortable when I read this abstract. And let me explain to you a little bit why, and I think why we have to push ourselves a little bit in this day and age as we look around in the world. We're not in the seminar rooms that I was sitting 20 years ago. We're not sitting in the same liberal, unipolar world driven by the US and a bunch of multilateral institutions 20 years ago. We're living in a very, very different world 20 years later. And when I hear phraseology as moral economy, I get nervous because I really don't know what morality means. You ask a Chinese minister, what is morality? You will get one answer. You ask Mr. Trump and people in the MAGA crowd, what is morality? What is a moral economy? You'll get a very different answer. You ask people in the global south, what is a moral economy? You'll get a third set of answers. My point is I just get nervous when we infuse politics in what you were saying, Nishan, which is an economic endeavor towards development, towards, frankly, material self-satisfaction for humanity. And I'm not sure, or I'd say there are many possible moral ways to achieve that. And we have to de-addict ourselves, maybe, of a certain morality, which I think is apparent in the abstract of this panel, which is apparent in the language that we speak in this panel and in these rooms these days, which equate, as you did, Kallol, economic development and fairer, more moral, you said, economic development with democracy.
Public policy, yeah.
No, you said a more authoritarian, you said, system is a less moral economy, or is less... I mean, I'm just asking us to... introspect and think from a global south perspective today, that a scientific record of economists who have tried to achieve and accelerate economic development, and maybe step back from the political path and judgments we have made and assumptions, Washington Consensus, for example, conditionalities of multilateral aid, ideas about governance that supposedly lead to better development. And I'm not contesting and saying they're necessarily bad, but I think it's certainly in this day and age, we need to introspect and pause a little bit when words such as morality come in. Because they can lead also to a lot of disastrous agendas. And let me bring in the United States of America again for the last 20 years, which has led to policies that have been disastrous for global south and developing countries, writing the idea of a more moral, human, just, equal economy, including military interventions, issues such as state building and nation building. I mean, what is nation building, right? And we have seen 20 years, if not more, of these ideas. Now, I'm not coming in defense. You may think, here's someone who's making a great defense of the Chinese model of a one-party-led state. Not at all. But I think that the one-party state in China and its success and growth in terms of delivering developmental solutions, certainly much faster than the Indian model. And again, I'm a defender of the Indian democratic development model. But it begs us to question, what models do we want to deliver? What economies do we want to deliver? And what are the political paths for those economic growth stories? And I think that's just a question I have. I like ending with questions because I think that's the fun thing about these discussions, and especially after 3 days of a conference where we all sat together here and discussed and we're all tired and we want to go home. But I think I really would like everyone to question when we hear issues of morality, justice, and economic development. And to end, Nishan, I think you're being very harsh on your profession. You economists have done a very good job. It's just a job which is finding developmental solutions, growth solutions. I mean, the SDGs are not about morality. There's one article, 14 or 16, about governance institutions that was smuggled in by, I think, mostly Western countries. But it's not about morality from a political value, ethics perspective. It is about material self-fulfillment, health, education.
SGDs are also not from the economists, but
but it is an economic exercise. It is. And I think that is what economics should restrict themselves to. Right. And maybe there I'll be harsh on economists when they go into issues like moral economy and what is a fair economy. I'm not sure that's the right. There, yes, please. Then we have to have different professions looking at this, including political scientists maybe. But the idea of growth needs to be thought in parallel and not necessarily in conjunction always with certain political models and values of morality. And I'll end on that. Morality is a very big word. It's been around. I'll confess that I'm a big fan of the old Stoics and Cynics and Realists. One of my favorite philosophers of all was Plutarch, who kept saying the only thing new in the world is the history we don't know. So looking backwards maybe will make us also a little bit more humble to think about what is moral, what has been moral. Maybe things 2,000, 3,000 years ago were extremely moral and certainly more moral than in this day and age, where we supposedly, according to Frank Fukuyama, think we're so much more developed, so much more advanced than 2,000 years ago. No, I don't think so. I think actually we're pretty much the same in terms of the gross national happiness of humanity as we were 2,000 or 4,000 years ago.
So, thank you for that very realistic on the question that we have at our hand right now. But there's a lot to dive into that to follow after that. But I would like to zoom out a little bit and look at this question from a more geopolitical angle, if I may. And for that, I would like the assistance of Zain. The question I have for you is, given that building a moral economy is not just for nations in isolation, but involves global commitments and solving many collective action problems, are there examples or new ideas for engaging the politics of our world to reshape the economics of our world in the shape of being more human? What steps can we take in that direction?
Thank you so much, Apun, for inviting me. I look at this question explicitly from a IR theoretical macro framework. The core challenge posed by this question, achieving collective action for a moral economy, is best understood through the lens of realism. I mean, realists, particularly structural realists, would argue that the international system's condition of anarchy fundamentally constrains the depth and effectiveness of any global commitments. States are the primary actors, and their actions are ultimately driven by the pursuit of security and relative gains. For this perspective, initiatives to build a moral economy are essentially a byproduct, they're secondary to power politics. While states might agree on climate accords or financial regulations, realists would argue that these commitments will be abandoned or weakened the moment they conflict with a great power's core national interest, such as economic competitiveness or military advantage. Therefore, the steps taken in this direction will always be limited by necessity of self-help in an anarchic world order. Now, if we look at it from a liberalism standpoint, the moral economy doctrine, liberal institutionalism provides the primary theoretical framework for addressing the problem of collective action and reshaping global economy. Liberals argue that while the system may be anarchic, international institutions and economic interdependence can significantly mitigate these effects. Institutions like the WTO, the SCO, or the G20 provide forums for repeated interaction, reduce transaction costs, and increase transparency, making it easier for states to achieve absolute gains, especially shared benefits. Examples like creation of global public goods initiatives demonstrate steps taken in the direction of a more human economy. These initiatives rely on the liberal idea that states can and will trade short-term competitive gains for long-term mutually beneficial cooperation. Reshaping the world order in this direction requires strengthening and deepening these institutions, making them more inclusive, and leveraging the power of non-state actors like NGOs and multinational corporations to influence states towards greater global accountability and moral governance. Now, if we look at South Asia in this perspective, for the nations of South Asia, a region grappling with immense domestic development needs, transboundary resource conflicts like water sharing, and severe impacts of climate change, this debate between realism and liberalism is not merely academic. States in the region often resort to realist calculations on issues of security and trade, prioritizing national growth over regional collective action, as seen in the limited scope of groups like SAARC. Yet the region's shared vulnerability to environment, rising seas, the economy, necessitates a liberal commitment to a multilateral solution and resource pooling. The ultimate question for South Asia and the world remains: can the immediate security-driven interests of sovereign states, the foundation of realism, be overcome by the compelling long-term necessity of collective survival and human dignity as championed by the liberal theory? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a little bit of debate going on between realism and, or more of like a rebellion going on, like a realist rebellion on the panel right now. So I'd like to ask the same question to Kallol, and just to rephrase, just to restate the question. Given that building a moral economy is not just for nations in isolation, but involves global commitments and solving many collective action problems, Are there examples of new ideas for engaging the politics of our world to reshape the economies of our world in the shape of being more human?
Well, I think I'm going to start with what you just talked about, Nishan, because also what Tino mentioned, and of course the realism. I think the big issue, rather the big disjuncture that we are facing right now, and I'm glad that you mentioned the MDGs. The issue is that today we have these gigantic, the wonderful universal development goals that are multilaterally agreed upon, and what happens after that is that this is again I'm targeting the democratic societies, democratic governments. Is that after these universal schemes are debated and adopted in global platforms, democratic leaderships return to their countries and go back to politics as usual. So what we have here today is this great disjuncture between the advocacy of the universal welfare, or say issues that are meant for the planet. At the same time, we have the same people who are talking about welfare of the planet are going back to their societies and practicing domestic exclusivist politics. And again, this is meant for countries that are democratic. I'm not talking about China here very clearly. What I find is that there is a great deal of inconvenient conversation that needs to be conducted on this particular sort of disjuncture, where we know what is good for us globally. We acknowledge them, we acknowledge the goals, and then we adopt them with grand joint declarations from the wonderfully titled platforms like G20, the United Nations, etc. And then the leaderships go back to the electoral mode, where we are back to MAGA. We are back to all sorts of other majoritarian identity politics. Of course, I think these sort of politics, this sort of exclusivist politics, makes for obviously spectacular electoral victories, as we are seeing. And some of the numbers that these political leaders are coming up from these democratic elections are absolutely mind-boggling, because it's really, really unthinkable in such social media-driven, obviously highly opinionated societies. We have these electoral numbers of two-thirds majority and even bigger majority, thumping majority in most of these democratic elections. And at the end of the day, what happens to those globally acknowledged goals that were adopted? So this disjuncture that we see in what is good for the planet, what is acknowledged and adopted for the planet, and then what the democratic societies do domestically, that calls for greater transparency and a great deal more discussion. I think I would let it go there.
Well, thank you so much. I wanted to circle back around to something that Constantino said to Nishan, a bit of a challenge, perhaps. Do you think you have something to add or to say to that as well?
Absolutely. I think it's really good to kind of take this conversation, Tino, further. One is, what Kallol is saying is highlighting this, what I call the prisoner's dilemma problem. We have a coordination problem that's preventing us solving a potentially catastrophic problem for all of humanity, climate change. Let's not be sanguine about that. And imagine that, that there isn't a global coordination problem, that if we don't solve, we collectively undermine the future of human well-being.
And I just want to make one point. Historically speaking, global leaders have not really met each other so often as they do these days.
Yeah. Even then, they are not able to do it.
They are literally meeting each other every fortnight.
Yeah. And so we still, and that SGDs, while you said they're great, actually nobody's learning how to measure them, track them, make them the center of progress and all that. But here's where, Tino, I think we agree more than we disagree, because your complaint about morality, I think, comes from recognizing that everybody has a different method, a different way of thinking what's moral or not, etc., right? And effectively, I think it's Alexander Pope, the poet, who said, "Over forms of government may fools contend, whatever is best administered is best." And I hear him in your voice. If you get the outcome, let's not worry about how we got there, because after all, isn't the outcome more important? I absolutely agree. But the outcome has a moral face to it. So Amartya Sen, in his book, Ideas of Justice, does a really good job of cutting through this problem of relatively different approaches to thinking about morality or justice, but huge agreement in what the outcomes ought to be in all these differences, different theories that we have about justice. So he really focuses on justice. And I think you are also saying that we have substantial capacity to agree on good outcomes and justice. And I think we're just using a different language. We are saying, well, those outcomes need to have some kind of value dimension. Why do we care about not having poverty? That's a value dimension, right? Why do we care about health or education? There's a value dimension there. So we are using the word morality not as systems of government, at least in the way I'm talking about it, but as outcomes in human lives that we want to advance and do that collectively. So I think that I agree with you that it is not about Fukuyama's idea that both democracy and capitalism was the end of history. And I'm agreeing with you that neither of them is the end of history. That democracy may not be the end of history. We may find other forms of government that work better for us. And capitalism is not the end of history. And both may be failing us quite substantially.
Yes.
And need to be rethought. But then rethought from a perspective of saying, human flourishing is still the goal. Otherwise, what is, right?
What is human flourishing?
That's very good. We can't agree on all aspects of it, but can't we agree on...
What is it?
So can we agree on some? That basic necessities being met for all human beings is part of that. That educational attainment of a certain sort, that human beings need to have access to education, and it is not merely literacy as being able to sign your name. The capacity to function in your society with dignity. And again, that's Rawlsy and Kallol, that dignity is a basic element of human well-being. That if you rob people of dignity, you undermine them, their humanity. So I think these are not controversial. We can, from China to Japan to the United States, we can agree that there's a set of human outcomes on which we can get substantial agreement, and SGDs did that in a very complex way. I'm saying let's do that in a slightly lesser way, but more than what we are doing now, and keep them as a measurable focus that we bring the world around into progressing and advancing. And the politics of doing that requires us to, figure out the ways we build consensus, and maybe it's not so tough. If we could get agreement on SJDs and globalize that, then we can get agreement on a lesser set, which we can actually concretely measure. Because, as you say, economists have sort of this, it's a human thing, right? What you can measure, you focus on, and you advance, and there is a merit to that. But the demerit is if you measure the wrong kinds of things, or neglect really important things. So let me stop there, because I do feel that your discomfort with morality is a discomfort with processes or systems, but the outcomes are also moral, or have some moral flavor to them, and being able to agree on them or some new subset may be the way we advance the world.
No, I'm going to allow Constantino to respond to that, but I do want the response to be within short, 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will move on to the third round and audience Q&A.
Good. And we also have 2 of us have a plane to catch, so. But no, great stuff. I wish we could go on and on. One, agree, Nishan, yes, but it is a causality between a political philosophy and a system and development, the material and the immaterial. And you can quantify happiness. The Bhutanese have developed a system to quantify it. But look at the...
Not very happy with that, yeah.
But look at the surreality of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
quantifying happiness. I mean, madness
Yeah.
for me, okay? But, and you know what I'm speaking from an economist and even from a
yeah,
human... Listen, how can you quantify happiness? But I hope there's no Bhutanese here. No, the Bhutanese prime minister was here recently. Maybe he's left, hopefully, already, but that's a separate debate. So the relation between the material and the moral, that is something that interests me a lot. I agree with you that there's many ways to the material, many moral ways to the material. But we cannot, I'm just inviting us all, this is again a real appeal, is that we have to rethink the paths that we assumed were natural of a certain morality.
Yeah.
In the global south, when I speak to people, they ask me, what does democracy deliver? Deliver, concretely, materially. What does a one-party state deliver for my health, my education, my water access? So let us revisit, and particularly in the global north, that causality. Right? And not just the idea of principles. It is a good thing because it's nice to have democracy, because there's dignity, because we can flourish, because we're happier, or because it's just as it is. Democracy is a better system. These are, I think, systems that we have to re-question, and it is good, therefore. And that's the only part I like in these abstract, which is it speaks about crisis and opportunity. By the way, very Chinese tandem, as you know. In every crisis, there's an opportunity, which is for the global north. Say if you're here from the development aid sector, from Germany or France or the EU or the US, you have to rethink what development means and how to deliver on development in synchronization with what is required, and by the way, in competition with alternative development models that did not exist 50 years ago. The socialist Soviet Union had one that collapsed eventually, but China today has a different one. India has a different development model. So you have to decide which are the ones that are more similar or not, according to politics. 2 quick points. I don't know if there's any philosopher in the room. One of my favorite philosophers, Bruno Latour, a French philosopher, who said we were never modern. For those who know what modernity is, it's an illusion. We thought we were modern, that's why we talk about post-modernity. Kallol and my friend, I think we never were, frankly, liberal. I mean, what liberal institutions? What liberal institutions, sanctions, invasions of other countries were reflections of power in the 1945s and 1950s? The United Nations Security Council is a liberal body, right? It's a syndicate of a few powers that arrogated themselves of power and have fleshed out institutions, monetary, financial, economic, political institutions that cemented asymmetry in the global order and pursued a certain model with benefits and some problems. I mean, as all models. So I don't think liberal institutions are dying. Let's face it. And coming to the last point on climate, therefore, I don't want to be sound only skeptical. Look at the climate space, Nishan. Liberal institutions or institutions, multilateral institutions, so-called universal institutions like the COP framework, right, under the UN, are slowly dying. I've been writing reports about this for the last 5 years. People called us mad 5 years ago. Today they realize that it's not against the COP or the UN, but that actually there are many more ancillary institutions that have been developed for climate action. Sector-wise and geography-wise, we have now banking systems that are talking about climate finance. We now have an International Solar Alliance, for example, on renewables, and clubs, different smaller clubs that are actually doing tremendous action on climate. So there are many ways, again, to decarbonization, and we can't be focused on, oh, this beautiful liberal institutional UN that was there, and in the case of the climate was there, and still is important, as we saw in Brazil, though with decreasing importance. So let us find also new avenues to develop collective action, which is a problem, but I'm not as skeptical, actually. I'm quite positive that humanity and, frankly, more individual. I agree. I mean, this idea that we were all universal and there's a disjunction, we all become protectionists and nationalists. I don't know, were we ever...
Ultra-nationalists.
No, I don't know. I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure that we were ever beautifully liberal internationally and engaged in, like you said, we would go for 50 years to multilateral frameworks and pretend to be multilateralists. We were not. Talk to the Chinese, talk to Indians, talk to Global South on trade. Was that multilateral and fair? It was not. It was a deeply unequal system structured in power. And I think revisiting that and coming back home, being more protectionist now, supposedly, which is bad, I'm not sure there's opportunities there for a rebalancing, for countries to reassess their national interest, and then forward again opportunities for collective action on climate, on energy, on migration, on many issues that will be problematic and warrant collective action, but maybe in a different way from the one we've had over the last 75 years.
But very quickly, because see, you mentioned Nishan Amartya Sen. Sen said, and also he wrote a book about development as freedom.
Yes.
If I say morality is freedom, because we are in Bangladesh, and we saw what happened last year in Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina had the same principle, that she gave development. So therefore, you better be grateful to me and keep voting for me. This country voted for morality as freedom. So again, I think the issue is what you're saying. I get you fully, but then countries, when you say countries, I mean, the countries that I look at are the decolonized societies. And we have never been part of the Vienna Accord or Vienna Concord of the 19th century. We are not part of that multilateralism. We are not, when I was researching 1919 League of Nations, was Bangladesh or who are the people representing India? The princely states, the princes were representing India. So were we there at the beginning, at that multilateralism? No, we aren't there. So certainly, we can't talk about countries like all countries are equal. We are decolonized societies, and we have to remember where we come from. So I think, I would like to be a little more careful when talking about the fact that, of course, I love, fast delivery of public goods like the Chinese model. But then for me, freedom and the associated, the auxiliary items that come with freedom are equally important. And I think I'm saying this because I don't want to miss out to the context that we are here.
Human agency and dignity are essential parts of sensing human. Of course, when you can't measure them and how you talk about them, there are complications. But let's not shove them aside completely, right? So, but I think of course we don't disagree with Tino. He's simply saying, let's focus on the outcomes too.
Listen, the paradox today is that you have in authoritarian societies, in the Gulf countries and in China, better libraries with more knowledge than in democratic global South countries. That is the paradox I want us to think about. How do you have universities in China?
We are not holding the flag for democracy in the way we have
Nor am I for Chinese libraries, which I would not like to study. That is a paradox.
Chinese media.
Yes, thank you for the very dynamic interventions. I believe it's almost time to round out this panel. I'm going to give it to our minister to round it up, but as he's giving his closing speech, if anyone has any questions, please, there are open mics available. Just stand in front of them. After the minister has given his final remarks, I'll take questions, and we don't have that much time. So a few questions for panelists, and then after the Q&A, we'll wrap up the session. So, Mr. Abdullah, I think we heard a lot of debate and discussion, right? But from your experience as a statesman, what do you think actually works in the current world that we live in? How do we promote humanity? What is the answer to individualism and the way society is functioning at the moment, which leads to these kind of debates? And how do we promote social capital in general?
Okay, thank you. Even my fellow panelists mentioned about the moral economy, and materialism is, I think, one thing we should highlight. We know that in the current world, most of the people are very materialistic. When we become so much materialistic, we forget about others. We forget about the society. We forget about even the environment. Is a reason we are lacking the social capital. We are interested only financial capital. Now the question is, what is social capital? I'm sure you all know what social capital is. Social capital includes promoting trust and nurturing relationship, participating in the community, promoting the well-being of the society. Therefore, in a more humanistic approach for the moral economy, my suggestion is we should have time to think about others. We should have time to think about our own environment. In the expense of the environment, we should not become rich in terms of economy. We can see the world's richest country, the USA. In the first term of the President Trump, USA has withdrawn from Paris Agreement, for which really people were worried about. Then again, when Biden becomes the president, again USA joined. And now again, President Trump is in the presidency. And he again decided to withdraw from Paris Agreement, saying that they cannot compromise their economic wealth. So we can see that people are interested only becoming rich by forgetting about the consequence of that. Therefore, since the time is already behind the time, I'm not going to talk much time. But I really call upon everyone present here, let's try to promote social capital, meaning that let's promote the relationship. Let's take care of the others. We should not believe that the saying end means end justify the means. No. If we talk about the moral economy, we should not believe that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Minister. So I will take questions now. Please walk up to the mic, and you can ask a question to the whole panel or to a certain panelist if you want.
My name is Minhajul Islam. My question is to the whole panel, especially regarding the idea of development model and economic model. In the post-colonial or say underdeveloped countries or developing countries, development is usually treated synonym of industrialization, privatization, and especially in India and Bangladesh, the economists seem to advocate this development process as standard experience, referring the Western experience over the years, or the Chinese experience, some says. My question is it really something standard experience or absolutely prescribed model of development? SDG you can think. Can't we imagine something else based on substantial informal economy that actually sustains the socio-economic fabric? Do we feel the necessity to think different approaches regarding development theories? Shouldn't we set up context-based development theories, region-based industrial process, situation-based development ideas regarding the true development related to the people of this region? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more question.
Good evening to all the panelists. I'm Navid. I'm a student of economics from Dhaka University. As a student of economics, I was kind of enjoying the session. There was a lot of interesting topics, inequality, social capital. So as we talk about building a moral economy, there are some topics that comes into my mind is the geopolitics. There is certainly geopolitical irony. There is the problem of moral hazard. So my question to all the panelists, anyone can answer, there is major powers in the Bay of Bengal region. They preach climate morality too much, but when it comes to applications, they basically finance fossil fuel expansion and militarization. So how should a country like Bangladesh respond to this duality without undermining its strategic relationships with its neighbors? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more question, but that's it for now, please.
Thank you. My name is Xavier. I'm a policy researcher. So I think the very title of this conversation, the last two words, the planet in peril, I think perhaps demanded bit of clarifications here before going the moral debates. So if we really consider the planet is in peril, I think a simple way to explain it, the 9 planetary boundaries, out of which 7 is overshoot beyond their safe operating space. So, and the reason or drivers is the per capita footprint or the emissions or ecological footprint is way much higher in the global north than in the global south. But to deal with this crisis, the multilateral governance mechanism that is set up in 1930s and 1940s there was a context of there is a colonial root out there. And the way those institutions are built and structured is, and the ways operating is no different than the colonial structure of exploitation, appropriation, and I don't see any difference. So in this context, three of the speakers referred to why this, particularly on the climate context, this multilateralism is not working. The planet is already like warmer 1.5 degrees. The people are talking to keeping it like below 2 degrees Celsius. I find it very ridiculous. But anyway, my questions would be the middle part of this Bay of Bengal conversation, the rupture part. If we really, many would argue, there are many folks out there, and many of you follow that we are really heading toward a multipolar world or multipolar governance mechanism, perhaps. In that context, do you see there are opportunities or opening, maybe a bigger ruptures that can open up that avenue for cooperations in dealing with some of the existential kind of crisis that we are facing, including climate, as well as some of it may be driven by frontier technology.
For rupture.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let the panel answer each of these questions, the one about development model and economic model, the one about inconsistent application of morality in the region, and also opportunities for rupture. But do keep in mind that some of you have to go to the airport soon. So please have mercy on your panelists and try to answer as briefly as possible. Anyone can take any of those questions.
So I would just take that on multipolarity, which is talked about here. I was just talking about it, I think, in a studio setup here 2 days ago. And I said that multipolarity, and very often what we hear in New Delhi is plurilateralism, is not just an option for large powers. This is also an option for middle powers and smaller countries. Because remember that the bloc politics of the non-aligned period was between the big two East and Western blocs. But today what we have is essentially an example of multipolarity. And if you are telling, say, the superpower of the world that, hey, listen, I can't come with you because I believe in multipolarity, your smaller neighbors can also tell you that, listen, I also believe in multipolarity, and my pole is someone else and not you. So the point is that this is a good sign in one way, because it indicates a greater democratization of the Committee of Nations, but this also opens up ways for ruptures, and that's why I believe it's not just about strict economics. I think it's also a great deal about political awareness among the developing societies, where I believe that we have to have more and more dialogue so that these great ruptures don't emerge and don't surprise us.
Right, thank you. So anyone else wants to take any of the other two questions?
Yeah, I'll just focus on the Bay of Bengal one, and to end on a very positive note, and after three days to focusing, it's called the Bay of Bengal conversation. We really have to think of our location. We talked a lot about big things, morality, economy, global. 2 points I want to anchor that I think are fertile for more work in the Bay of Bengal, that relate to a better economy, and forget moral, forget geopolitics, connect with each other. We have not connected with each other. This is, according to the World Bank, the region that has most grown in the last 20 years at 5-6% of the entire world, but we are still below the levels of connectivity in terms of infrastructure, transportation, energy that we were in the 1960s between Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, India. We are behind the curve. Let us connect and build the hardware to build then the software of the economies, whether they're moral, immoral, we can deal with that. First, we have to find the roads, the railways, the ports, the transmission lines to allow us to move capital and people across this region. One. Second is state capacity. I'm worried about state capacity. That's maybe because I'm a political scientist. We can talk about moral economy and economics, geopolitics. If we don't have a capable state, and this is not political leaders that come and go every 4 or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. This is about technocrats. This is about bureaucrats. This is about civil servants, people who know to look at finance deals, to look at transportation agreements, who measure out the terms of connectivity and take long-term policy horizons to deliver development to their countries. I think that state capacity is limited. It's being attacked by other actors in many ways, private sector in particular. And I think an investment in state capacity today is a very wise tool in order to then find, accelerate more development in this region.
Thank you so much. I think, would you like
so I think, thank you for all those questions. And if I kind of summarize where we are at, this Bay of Bengal conversation is so important because I do think that the world is changed by conversations. And when we say democracy, we don't really mean voting. We mean government by conversation. And when human beings are able to talk and really talk, as perhaps we're doing here, we change the way we think, we change the way we imagine, and we change the way we act, and that's the power. And I think for us, it is important to stop or overcome perhaps a colonial heritage of waiting for the West to solve the problems, waiting for the West to take leadership and act. And imagine in this Bay of Bengal conversation that what we are doing here is suggesting that we can start acting first. We can give leadership to the world in the direction it should move. The way you solve a prisoner's dilemma problem, I've kept saying this, is to act first in trust and solidarity and confidence and allow others then to imitate you. I think we have to stop imagining that the solutions will come from the UN or the old structures of the world or the powerful countries that we imagine and think that we have the power to be first movers. And in doing that, I have proposed two things. One, that, all this thing about development, that we talk, and I think I like what Tino said, it's all nice talk, right? And it's cheap talk. It becomes, something concrete when we measure it, when we focus on it, and we determine collectively to deliver on it. Yes. And Tino is right to get us to delivery, and we're in agreement. But these are things that have a moral dimension, Tino. They are not immoral things. But the ability to talk and agree and then focus and deliver, not wait for foreign aid, not wait for somebody else, but do it ourselves and as we can. And I think this is the motivation that is set off by this Bay of Bengal conversation, which I'm so pleased to be a part of.
Thank you so much, Nishan. And with that beautiful end note, I would like to wrap up this session. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry, no more time for questions. We are already overdue. Our closing session will begin very soon. And of course, some of us have flights to catch. So thank you again, honorable panelists. And thank you, our esteemed guests, for bearing with our manual and our arguments for so long. And I think the MC can close out the session for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Apollo.
Thank you.
Thank you.